Now, moving on to a very interesting documentary, and sperm donation has been under the spotlight recently thanks to a parliamentary discussion paper on the matter.
Tonight, an ABC documentary looks at the moral dilemma posed by anonymous sperm donation and the effects not just on those who are conceived, but on their donors, but on donors themselves rather, and their families.
The 1970s saw a scientific revolution in the technology to freeze and store sperm. For as little as $10 a time, men donated their sperm to help create babies for infertile couples. But for the families, the identity of the sperm donor was shrouded in secrecy. Most donor-conceived people have no idea how they were conceived, and those who do face huge obstacles in the search for their donor parent.
Lisa Haller is the producer of Sperm Donors Anonymous, and Ian Smith, who's with us as well this morning, donated anonymously during the late 1980s, and they both join us now. Good morning to you, and thanks for making time. It's a fascinating area, and I guess it's part of our history, and it's defined by some of the mores and approaches of the time. There were those who donated, but then if you received sperm donation, it seems almost universally, the parents didn't tell the children that they were donor conceived.
I think at that time, definitely in the 70s and 80s, even in the 90s, even today, today, parents on the whole didn't tell their children that they were donor conceived. I don't think they were encouraged to by the clinics. I think it was suggested, this never happened. Go home. No, don't speak
Enjoy your
about
child,
it.
get on with your life.
Get on.
Ian, tell us your story. How did you become a donor? What prompted you in the first place?
There was publicity on, I think it was ABC Radio, I heard a story. I wasn't married at the time, and I have a good friend who at the time was considering donor conception, so I was aware of it. And I thought, oh, I can help. Seemed simple, but it wasn't. Why
wasn't it simple? How did it end up being complex for you?
Well, because I now realise I have 7 children who I've never met. I have 2 children who live with me, who've spent their lives with me. I've got 7 other children who I may never meet.
Would you like to meet them?
Yes, absolutely.
And what are the obstacles to that at the moment?
The main obstacle, I think, is the one you touched on a moment ago, that often the children don't know. They're not children, they're adults now. From the 70s and 80s, they're adults. But often their parents haven't told them.
For very good reasons sometimes. Different parents have different reasons for not telling their kids.
At the same time, all of the donor-conceived people who I've met say that they fundamentally want to know that fact. They don't like the secret. And
Lisa, there were formal impediments put in the way. It was to be an anonymous donation, and the men were to be protected, as it were.
Well, I think donors were told their donation would be anonymous at that time. Sometimes they would sign something, agreeing to be anonymous. But I don't think there was choice. There wasn't a choice given at that time, and similarly for the parents, there wasn't a choice. This is how things worked.
So has time not changed that? Has there not been some revisiting of the protocols that were put in place around that donation?
I think the guidelines. There's no federal legislation. It's not banned in Australia by law that you can use anonymous. That you can't use anonymous sperm and eggs anymore. You can also go overseas and seek. You can go to Spain or Greece and get an anonymous egg, and doctors may encourage you to do that.
No, I meant retrospectively. I mean, what sort of prohibited then? The two of you, the child and you, making contact with each other. Is that still in place? That I guess the records weren't kept. Is that the issue?
The issue is that records have been destroyed, or it's hard to access those records in many cases.
It's the 70s and 80s records that are the problem.
Right.
The practice now is much better, but 70s, 80s, it was the early days of donor conception, and it was very rough and ready in many cases. And the records are just not there in a lot of cases.
So as a result, you would have trouble tracking down the 7 children, and they, if they wanted on their own volition to track you down, would also have trouble.
In my case, I'm fortunate because I was at Prince Henry's Hospital, and they're some of the best records that exist.
Okay.
But, for example, the Queen Victoria Hospital, that's no longer there, a lot of those records were just destroyed.
And in South Australia, one of the people in the film is from South Australia, who's conceived there, and records were deliberately destroyed in a number of the clinics there. And for his case, I think he was conceived at Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Adelaide, and I could never find out whether those records still existed or not.
And Lisa, those subjects who took part in your documentary who were searching for their donor father, for their biological father, either successfully or unsuccessfully, how big an issue is it for them?
I think for the people in our film, the four donor-conceived adults we concentrated on, they all found out as adults that they were donor-conceived. They found out in not ideal circumstances. You know, one of them read it in his mother's autobiography, found out that way. Another found out while his father was dying. So therefore, not knowing and then finding out as an adult that your dad is not your biological father, I mean, it has a profound impact on people.
Absolutely. And how do your two children who've been raised by you feel about the 7 others out there?
They're curious. I've introduced a complexity to their lives well before they were born that they haven't chosen, and it's just there, and they have to cope with it. They deal with it sensitively, and they would probably prefer I wasn't as public as I am, but they're tolerant of that.
Ian, do you regret being a sperm donor?
I regret being a sperm donor in the circumstances that I was, because I've given away my children with no prospect of, well, not no prospect, no certainty that I will ever know them, and I don't know what their lives have been like.
And that must be a great sorrow.
Oh, it is. It's a great sorrow. I talk in the documentary, I say I can go down a very dark path with that if I think too much about it. It's a great sorrow.
It's a fascinating area. Look, thanks so much, the two of you, for joining us this morning and talking so openly about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks.
And that documentary, of course, on ABC TV.